He died with his wedding ring still on. The same ring I placed on his finger 54 years ago. The same ring I kissed the night before he left for his final fishing trip and never came back. They told me it was a heart attack. Quick. Clean. He fell against the railing of his boat somewhere near Resurrection Bay. And that was it. They brought his body home in a closed casket. They brought his jacket, his ring, and his old sea-worn boots. And then they brought something else. A woman. My age. She walked into the memorial hall like she had a right to grieve. Her hair was freshly done. Her coat was the expensive kind you don't buy unless someone's been loving you well. But what caught my eye wasn't her. It was the two grown men standing quietly behind her. Early 40s. Tall. Strong. They didn't look at me. They stood beside the photo display, the one I had spent all night arranging, and pulled out a frame from a tote bag. A frame of their own. In it was a picture of him. But he wasn't beside me. He was in a cabin I'd never seen before. Standing between the woman and those two men. Smiling like a man who belonged. I remember staring at that photo, trying to make it make sense. I remember thinking maybe he had a twin I never knew about. But then one of the men turned. He looked at me with eyes that weren't just familiar. They were his. My husband's. The woman placed her hand on my arm and said the words that still echo like an avalanche in my chest. I'm so sorry for your loss. He meant everything to us. To us. Not just to me. And just like that, the man I buried wasn't just my husband anymore. He was hers. The sons I dreamed we'd have together. He'd had them. With her. While I was home in the snow with our one daughter, carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs, covering for his absences, folding his flannel shirts, he was there. Living a whole other life. A whole other love. The funeral proceeded like I wasn't even breathing. Faces blurred. Hugs felt hollow. I couldn't cry. Not then. Not when my whole life had just split open in the same building where we'd once had our wedding reception. I waited until the guests were gone. Then I walked up to the table, picked up the frame they left behind, and stared at that picture one more time. There, in the corner of the image, was a carved wooden plaque. The name of the cabin. The name of a town. A place I had never heard him mention. That's when I knew. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a second home. A second life. And I was the one he left waiting in the cold. But what shattered me most wasn't the betrayal. It was what I would uncover next. Because when I went to that cabin weeks later, when I finally laid my hands on what he had built without me, I found out who that second family really was. And it wasn't just shocking. It was unspeakable. Make sure you like this video if you've ever had your trust broken by someone you loved. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more emotional true stories like this. My name is Florence Morrow. I'm 79 years old, and I've lived in the same clapboard house in Kodiak, Alaska for nearly 5 decades. It sits at the edge of a pine break, not far from the sound of seals and seagulls. People here remember me as the woman with the blue scarf, the one who baked cranberry scones for church socials and taught children how to knit at the library during the long winters. I was a wife. I was a mother. I was steady. I was also a fool. At least, that's how it felt for the first few days after the funeral. I moved through the hours in a kind of frozen fog. I made tea I didn't drink, opened drawers and forgot what I was looking for. I kept thinking, maybe the grief is tricking me. Maybe what I saw at the memorial wasn't what it looked like. But then came the envelope. No return address. Inside it was a folded piece of paper. Typed. All it said was, check the deed to the cabin in Seldovia. Ask your lawyer who the co-owner is. Seldovia. That was the name etched on the cabin plaque in the photo. I stared at the paper so long I forgot I was holding it. Then I called Mr. Brooks, our family lawyer, and asked him to meet me the next morning. He showed up in his usual gray coat, smelled like pipe tobacco, and looked at me like someone holding a fragile glass in a windstorm. He didn't ask why I wanted to check the property records. He just nodded and got to work. 15 minutes later, he looked up from the county database. His voice was quiet. "Florence, your husband listed the Seldovia cabin as a joint property." "With me?" I asked, already knowing. He shook his head. "With a woman named Ruth Travers." I didn't say anything. Just nodded once, stood up, and walked out the door. It took 3 more days to gather the nerve to drive out to that cabin. I packed only what I needed: thermals, coffee, my pistol, and a small notebook. I didn't know what I expected to find. Certainly not what I did. The drive to Seldovia was long and winding. I had to take the ferry across Kachemak Bay and then follow a rugged road past frozen streams and quiet pine. When I reached the cabin, it was nearly dusk. It looked just like the photo: cedar siding, green shutters, a small chimney breathing smoke into the air. I knocked. No answer. The place was locked, but I remembered something my husband once told me when he came back from one of his mysterious retreats. "If you ever get lost," he said, "check under the wolf stone. Every cabin's got one." Sure enough, beside the porch was a wide flat rock with a carving of a wolf. Underneath it, a key. Inside, the air was warm. A fire still smoldered. Someone had been there recently. The walls were covered in framed photographs. Some new, some faded with time. I expected to see him. I expected to see her. What I didn't expect were the children. So many children. A dozen at least, in various stages of growing up. Some blonde, some with freckles, some with jet black hair and olive skin. Boys, girls, teens, none of them matching, yet all tied to this space like roots in the same soil. I stared at the photos for a long time, my eyes hunting for explanation. And then I saw it. In one corner frame, him, standing in the snow, holding a toddler. The child wore a winter hat, blue with a tiny patch. That patch. It was the same patch from a children's group in Anchorage. A foster group. A foster home. I opened a drawer in the entry table. Inside were dozens of folders, documents, report cards, adoption notices. That's when I realized what this really was. He hadn't just started a second family with a mistress. He had taken in children. Dozens of them. Over the years. And some of them had his last name. The betrayal didn't just cut because he'd loved someone else. It cut because he had shared something sacred with those children that he never gave to mine. To me. He'd built a life of second chances, fathered boys and girls who now called someone else Mom, and never once asked if I wanted more than one daughter. He let me believe we couldn't afford to raise more, that it was better this way. But all along, he had enough love, enough time, enough home, for them. I sat down in the middle of that cabin floor and cried like a woman who had just been erased from her own story. And then I heard the sound. Footsteps on the porch. Keys rattling at the door. And a voice. Deep, male, older now, but unmistakably familiar. "Why are you here?" he asked. But he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to someone else. Someone I wasn't prepared to see. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. The sound of the front door unlocking felt like it came from a dream, like I wasn't supposed to still be sitting there when it happened. But I was. Frozen in the middle of that cabin, surrounded by photo frames of strangers who shared my husband's face. The door creaked open. I turned slowly, clutching my notebook like it could shield me. And in stepped the last person I expected. A tall, broad-shouldered man with sun-damaged skin and gray in his beard. He didn't look surprised to see someone inside. He looked annoyed. Like a man catching a dog in his yard. "Why are you here?" he asked again, louder this time. He hadn't seen me clearly yet. The light from behind him threw his face in shadow. Then his eyes adjusted. He squinted. And I watched it happen. Slowly. Recognition. Then confusion. Then something else. "Florence," he said, his voice lower now, like gravel under snow. He stepped closer. "You're not supposed to be here." I could say the same, I answered, standing up. My knees trembled, but I refused to let them show it. There was a long silence. He looked older than I remembered, but not like a stranger. He had my husband's jaw, my husband's slow blink, my husband's ears that stuck out just slightly when his head tilted. But this man wasn't my husband. He was someone else entirely. He took off his snow cap and ran a hand through his thinning hair. I'm Marshall, he said. Marshall Travers. Travers. The same last name as Ruth, the woman from the funeral. I know who you are, I said. I saw you standing beside her. She's my mother, he replied gently. And he was my father. I swallowed hard. He was my husband. Marshall nodded slowly, like he wasn't surprised, like he had carried the weight of that truth a long time. Then he stepped around me and started putting logs into the fireplace. Just like that. Like I wasn't his father's first wife. Like I wasn't standing in the ashes of my life. You don't have to believe me, he said, his voice steady. But I never meant to hurt you. I looked at him. Really looked. And I saw the weight in his shoulders. The practiced way he moved around the cabin. This wasn't just a place he visited. This was home. You knew about me? I asked. He hesitated. Not always. When did you find out? He paused again. When I was 14. I sat back down. He didn't try to comfort me. And I was grateful. I didn't want pity. I wanted answers. He poured me a cup of tea without asking and handed it over. Then he sat across from me, elbows on his knees, and began. He met my mother before you ever knew him. When they were both barely 20. It was a summer thing. Then he moved away, said he had to make something of himself. My mom never told him she was pregnant. She married someone else who gave me his last name. I thought that man was my real dad for years. I held my breath. Then your husband came back into her life when I was 12. Said he saw my photo online somehow. Said he recognized something in my face. They met up. Talked. And he said he wanted to do better. To help. Marshall stared into the fire. From there, he started coming around. Quietly. Then more often. He paid for my school, helped us get the cabin. Said he'd never stop being there. But he made it very clear, he had a life somewhere else. One that couldn't change. I sat back, heart thudding. So he hadn't just created a second family. He had tried to hide the first one. Me. Our daughter. The life we built while he chased shadows in someone else's home. Why didn't you come forward when he died? I asked. Would you have believed me? He asked almost sadly. What would it have changed? Everything, I whispered. Marshall leaned back. You should know something else. He reached under the coffee table and pulled out a shoebox. Inside were letters. All of them addressed to me. Some dated as far back as the 1980s. Some newer. Some unopened. Dad wrote these, he said. He never mailed them. Said he couldn't. Said you wouldn't forgive him. I opened one at random. The ink was smudged. The handwriting familiar. My heart broke with each line. I'm sorry. I should have told you about Marshall. I thought I was protecting you. You deserved better than a man who splits his love in two. I closed the letter. It didn't make anything easier, but it made things clearer. I stood up, took the box, and looked at Marshall one last time. Thank you, I said. Not because I forgave him, but because I had finally heard the truth. I stepped outside into the freezing Alaskan night. And as I walked back toward my car, I saw the porch light flick on behind me. Then a voice. Soft. Young. Curious. Is she the other grandma? I turned. A small girl stood barefoot in the doorway. Big eyes. Braided hair. Holding a book. She looked exactly like my daughter did at that age. My breath caught. And that's when I realized. He hadn't just raised a second family. He had raised children who might not even know their true names. The drive back to Kodiak was quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that fills your ears like snow, too thick to hear your own thoughts. The shoebox of letters sat on the passenger seat beside me. The final letter, dated just 6 weeks before his death, was the one I couldn't stop replaying in my mind. He wrote, "I think I finally understand what I did. It wasn't just the lie. It was stealing from you the life you would have chosen if you knew the truth." Stealing. That's the word that stayed. Not lying. Not hiding. Stealing. And he was right. He didn't just take away fidelity. He took away choices. He took away children we could have raised together. Conversations we could have had. Years I spent wondering what I had done wrong when we couldn't grow our family. Turns out, he'd been growing one somewhere else. But I wasn't ready to let that cabin, or the girl in the doorway, go just yet. So 2 weeks later, I returned. This time in daylight. The cabin had a small porch swing, and I saw her again, curled up with a blanket and a tattered book, boots kicked off, swinging gently. She must have been 9, maybe 10. Her coat was too big for her. Her braids were lopsided. And when she saw me coming, she didn't run. She smiled. "Are you back?" She asked like I was a friend, not a stranger. I nodded. "I'm Florence." "I know," she said, scooting over. "My dad told me." "Your dad?" I asked, expecting her to say Marshall. But she shook her head. "Not that one. The one who died. I call him Papa Clay. Clay. My husband's middle name. A name I hadn't heard used in decades." She patted the swing. "You can sit. It's not that cold today." I sat beside her, stiff, but willing. She showed me the book on her lap. It was an old Alaskan children's story I'd read to my daughter once, about a fox that learns to survive in winter alone. "He read this to me every night when he came," she said. "Said it was his favorite." I smiled tightly. It used to be my favorite, too. She flipped to a page near the back. "Sometimes," she said, "I read it out loud so he can still hear me. Do you think he can?" I didn't have the heart to answer with anything but a nod. Then she said something that made the porch spin around me. "My mom said you were his secret wife." "Did she now?" She nodded. "She said you're the one he married first. The one he never stopped writing about." My voice caught. "She told you that?" "She tells us everything. She's not like other moms." I looked at her closely. "You said us. How many are here?" She thought about it. "There's 6 of us full-time. 2 teenagers and then us little ones. Sometimes more come in and out, but Mama Ruth says we're the keepers." The keepers. The word felt holy and tragic at once. I looked toward the edge of the woods, where I saw an old swing set, a fire pit, and a clothesline full of small socks. "Does Ruth teach you?" "She teaches us math. But Papa Clay taught us about trees, weather, firewood, and fishing. He said knowing the land was like knowing your family." I couldn't speak. This man, my husband, who used to fall asleep halfway through reading bedtime stories to our daughter, had taught these children survival, patience, heritage. He had shown up for them. All the things I begged him to do for us, he had found the strength to do here. "I miss him," she whispered. I looked over. Her lip trembled. She didn't blink. She just stared down at the book like it held her entire world. And something inside me broke open. Not in anger. In grief. Because this child wasn't guilty of anything. She didn't choose to be born from deception. She only knew love. And now loss. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch I hadn't opened since the funeral. Inside was my husband's wedding ring. The one they returned with his belongings. I pressed it into her hand. "Keep this," I said. "He would have wanted you to have it." She stared at it, wide-eyed. Then without a word, She slid it onto a chain around her neck and tucked it into her coat. The door creaked open behind us. Ruth stepped out. Her face was softer this time. Worn. Unsure. "I didn't expect you to come back," she said. "I didn't expect to be welcomed," I answered. She walked slowly over, wrapped her arms around the girl, and kissed the top of her head. "We don't keep secrets in this house anymore," she said. And I believed her. We went inside, and she poured me coffee. No apologies. No justifications. Just the sound of cups clinking and children's laughter down the hall. On the wall, I noticed something new. A corkboard filled with pinned photos. Old ones. New ones. In the top corner, I saw a picture I hadn't seen in 50 years. It was me, holding my daughter in front of a church. He must have kept it in secret. Like a treasure he wasn't brave enough to carry publicly. I stared at it until Ruth noticed. He brought that here a few months before he passed. Said it was the only truth he never stopped loving. I turned to her. "You said you didn't keep secrets anymore." She nodded slowly. "There's one more you need to know." She pointed toward the far hallway. A boy stood there. Tall. 15 maybe. Curly hair. Light eyes. "That's Isaiah," she said. "Is he?" She nodded. "He's yours too, Florence." My legs gave out before the scream even formed. My knees buckled. Ruth reached out instinctively, guiding me to a chair before I collapsed entirely. My fingers trembled against the armrest, cold and rigid like something had cracked inside me and let the winter in. I looked at the boy again. He stood at the end of the hallway like he didn't know what to do. Half a shadow, half a secret. His eyes met mine, then dropped to the floor. Shy. Or scared. I recognized the curve of his chin immediately. The softness around the mouth. The expression that flickered between wanting to speak and needing to disappear. My daughter made that same face when she was a child and spilled juice on the carpet. "Isaiah," I whispered. Ruth placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "He doesn't know everything. Just that Clay, your husband, was his father. And who does he think I am?" I asked. Ruth's voice broke. "He thinks you're a kind woman who visited once." I felt that like a punch to the chest. He thinks I'm no one. And yet he is mine. My daughter. I asked, voice low, cold with grief. "Does she know she has a brother?" "No," Ruth said. And it wasn't my secret to tell. I sat there in silence. The walls of the cabin didn't just hold photographs and folded sweaters. They held the very life I was denied. And this boy, Isaiah, was living proof of it. Not a memory. Not a theory. A boy. Flesh and blood. With my husband's hands and, God help me, my eyes. Why? I finally asked Ruth. Why didn't he tell me? She lowered herself across from me, shoulders hunched as if she were preparing to be hit by something she couldn't dodge. Because Isaiah wasn't born the way the others were. I stared. She continued. Clay and I weren't together like that anymore. Not in that way. He had gone back to being distant. Quiet. Like something had changed in him. She looked toward the hallway. Then one night, he showed up with a newborn in his arms. My chest clenched. From where? He never said. Just that the baby had no one else. That the mother had vanished. And that this child needed protection. I swallowed hard. Are you saying he adopted Isaiah? She hesitated. No. I'm saying. I don't know where Isaiah came from. Not fully. Clay never gave me details. Only said the boy had roots deeper than we could see. And that he was mine now. I stared at the floor. She reached into a drawer and slid over a file. Inside was a single birth certificate. No mother listed. Father. Clay Morrow. My husband. And scrawled in faded blue ink along the bottom line. Special circumstances. Verified private custody transfer. I shook my head. This isn't legal. No, Ruth said. But it's all we had. Isaiah stepped closer. He carried something in his hands. A folded drawing. He extended it to me, quiet. I opened it slowly. It was a child's sketch, crude, but clear. A cabin. A tall man. A woman with gray hair. And beside her, a boy with curly hair and a dog. Written in uneven block letters at the top. Me and Grandma. I blinked at it. He said that was you, Isaiah whispered. He said you might come one day. My throat closed. I looked up at him. He waited, still shy, still unsure. I reached out and touched his hand. His skin was warm, steady, like a rope thrown into icy water. I held on to it. You have his eyes, I whispered. He smiled. They say I have your nose. I laughed or tried to, but it came out like a cough strangled by tears. The door behind us opened suddenly, and Marshall entered. His eyes flicked between me, Ruth, and Isaiah. He knew. By the way his jaw tensed, by the way his shoulders fell. He had known for years. I stood up. I need time, I said. Ruth nodded. Isaiah's expression dropped, but I gently squeezed his hand. I'll be back. Promise? He asked. Cross my heart, I whispered. And I meant it. Because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about truth. A truth I hadn't asked for, but now couldn't turn away from. On my drive back to Kodiak, I kept the sketch beside me. And when I got home, I didn't cry. I lit a fire. I took down our family albums. And I began preparing to do something I hadn't done in decades. Tell my daughter everything. My daughter's name is Elise. She's 48 now. A therapist. A wife. A mother of twins who just turned 11. She lives 3 towns away in Palmer, where the snow doesn't pile quite as deep and the grocery stores don't close by 5. We talk every week. But I hadn't told her yet. Not about the photo at the funeral. Not about Ruth. Not about Isaiah. Not about how the man we both mourned had carried a second life in his coat pocket for decades. I knew this conversation couldn't be done over the phone. So I baked her favorite pear cake, wrapped it in wax paper like I used to when she was in college, and drove to her house without calling first. She opened the door in her weekend sweatshirt and looked surprised. But not unhappy. Mom, she said, is everything okay? No, I answered gently. But it will be. She stepped aside and let me in. Her house smelled like cinnamon and wood polish. The boys were in the basement playing video games. Her husband waved from the living room before heading out for a grocery run. We sat at the kitchen table. The pear cake between us, untouched. Elise, I began. I need to tell you a story. It's going to hurt. But it's also going to answer questions you've had your whole life. She blinked. Her hand froze on her mug. I reached into my coat pocket and placed the birth certificate on the table. Right beside it, I set the photograph of Isaiah. And then I began. I told her everything. About the funeral. The strangers. The cabin. The shoebox of letters. The girl on the porch. The boy who looked like her. I didn't leave anything out. When I finished, she didn't cry right away. She stared at the photo for a long time. Then picked it up. Then put it back down. I always wondered, she said, voice dry, why he was so halfway with me. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet now. I thought I did something wrong. No, I whispered. He did. Her lips trembled. Was he happy? I think he was trying to be. In his own broken way. She nodded once. Then again. Then let out a single sob and wiped it away like she was embarrassed to cry in front of me. I want to meet them, she said after a long silence. I blinked. Are you sure? I'm not sure of anything, she said. But I know I need to see this boy. If he's my brother, then He deserves the truth too. We agreed to go the following weekend. Together. When we arrived at the cabin, Ruth met us at the door with wide, surprised eyes. She didn't speak right away, just hugged me gently and led us in. Isaiah was playing cards with the girl I'd met before. He looked up and smiled shyly, then saw Elise. His face tilted, confused. He stood slowly. "Isaiah," I said, my voice soft but firm. "This is Elise. She's your sister." He didn't react right away, but then he looked at her more closely. The same light eyes, the same left side dimple, the same quiet caution. "I have a sister?" he asked. Elise stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. "Yes," she said. "And I have a brother. That makes us even." He smiled. Not big, not bold, but enough. They sat down, talked. Not about the betrayal, not yet. About books. About cartoons. About favorite breakfast foods. And as the conversation grew, so did something I didn't expect to feel so soon. Hope. Later that night, Ruth and I sat by the fireplace. Just the two of us. She handed me a photo album I hadn't seen before. Inside were dozens of snapshots I'd never been part of. Camping trips, birthday cakes, Christmas mornings. Then, tucked into the back sleeve, was a folded letter. It was addressed to both of us, in Clay's handwriting. To my two wives. I didn't move. Ruth looked at me. "Do you want to read it?" she asked. I nodded. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. The letter was dated a year before he died. Florence. Ruth. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't know what you'll feel. Maybe hate. Maybe pity. Maybe nothing at all. But what I need you both to know is that you were never second best. Neither of you. Florence, you were my anchor. You held my world steady when it wanted to drift. You made the winters bearable. You gave me a daughter I should have loved louder. I thought I was sparing you pain by hiding my mistakes. I now know I only added to your silence. Ruth, you were my second chance. You showed me how to be softer. You gave me space to be a father, even if it wasn't perfect. You raised children with me when I didn't deserve that right. You forgave too easily. To both of you, I wish I had been brave enough to merge my lives. But I was a coward. And now you're the ones picking up the pieces. Please don't let what I hid become the only thing you remember. The letter ended there. No signature. Just his words. Ruth wiped her eyes. I folded the letter and placed it back in the book. We didn't speak for a long time. Outside, the wind howled against the roof. Inside, my heart beat quieter than it had in weeks. There was still more to face. More truths to uncover. But something had shifted. The story wasn't over. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, I was finally ready to write the ending myself. 1 week later, we invited them all to dinner. Not here at the cabin, not there in Palma, but in a neutral place. A lakeside community hall with cedar walls and space enough for questions to stretch their legs. I spent the morning setting the tables. Elise brought the pies. Ruth brought a salmon stew her mother used to make. Marshall brought the folding chairs. Isaiah brought the chessboard. By 5 o'clock, there were 9 of us, all tethered to one man. Some by blood, some by grief, all by silence. When everyone had their plates, I stood up at the end of the table. My hands were still raw from washing dishes, my heart steadier than I expected. "I want to say something," I said. The room quieted. I spent most of my life believing I knew what family meant. I thought it meant knowing everything. Holidays together. Shared stories. Matching photo albums. I looked at Isaiah, who had never spent a holiday with me. At Ruth, who had built stories I'd never heard. At Marshall, who carried our history like a folded map he didn't want to open. But now, I continued, I think family means showing up anyway. Even when it's messy. even when it hurts. Elise looked up at me, her fingers gently brushing Isaiah's hand beneath the table. And if we're going to move forward, I said, we do it honestly. We don't owe Clay peace, but we owe each other the truth. A few nods. Ruth stood next. I loved him, she said, eyes flickering. But I loved what we created more. These children. This home. This strange, broken, beautiful patchwork. And I hope we can find a way to stitch it together, without hiding the frayed parts. Even Marshall smiled at that. We ate slowly, in patches of conversation. I told Isaiah stories of his father in his younger years, how he once got chased by a moose trying to hang Christmas lights. Ruth told Elise how Clay used to hum while making pancakes. Elise told Marshall about the way their father used to build miniature ships out of driftwood and bottle caps. Each memory was a different man. Each man was the same. After dinner, Isaiah challenged me to chess. I hadn't played in years. He beat me in 10 moves, but didn't brag. Grandma, he said shyly, you think we'll have Thanksgiving together? I stared at him. He was so eager, so full of want. I nodded. Yes, I think we will. But not everything moved forward easily. The next morning, I got a call from a woman I hadn't spoken to in nearly 15 years. Her name was Lorraine. She used to work with Clay in the fisheries department. She'd attended the funeral, seen the photos. She had questions and secrets of her own. When I met her at a coffee shop, she slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were court records, filed 30 years ago, guardianship petitions, birth certificates, 2 more names, 2 more children. Not Ruth's, not mine. Another woman entirely. A 3rd branch of the tree. I stared at the paperwork, my stomach sinking. How do you know all this? I asked. Lorraine sipped her coffee slowly. Because one of them was mine, she said. And Clay? He helped me raise her when I couldn't. She handed me a photograph. A teenage girl. Long curly hair. Wearing one of Clay's old jackets. He told me he'd never let anyone know. That he didn't want to ruin what he had with you. My chest felt hollow. And he didn't, she added. Not until now. I drove home in silence. Back to Kodiak. Back to my porch. Back to the shoebox of letters I still hadn't finished reading. I opened the last envelope. No date. No salutation. Just 4 words. There's more to come. He had written it like a prophecy. And I suddenly knew. The second family wasn't the end. It was the middle. And the truth. The truth was still unfolding. The photograph Lorraine gave me stayed on my nightstand for days. Her daughter, Maya, was 16 when it was taken. She looked nothing like Clay. Not at first glance. But when I studied her face more closely, I saw it. The shape of her nose. The way her lips turned down slightly when she smiled. The tired look in her eyes, like she'd already carried the weight of a family she didn't quite belong to. Clay had helped raise her, Lorraine said. Quietly. From a distance. Like a ghost of a father. Like a man trying to repay a debt no one knew he owed. I reached out to Maya. She was 29 now. A nurse in Fairbanks. Married. No children. She picked up my call after 3 rings and spoke carefully, like someone trying to protect her heart from opening too fast. I know who you are, she said. He talked about you. Not often. But with softness. I swallowed. Do you want to meet? I think I do, she said. We agreed to meet halfway, in Anchorage, at a little diner with red vinyl booths and photographs of old fishing vessels lining the walls. She wore a wool coat and carried a small photograph in her pocket. It was a picture of her and Clay sitting on a rock near a river. She couldn't have been older than 7. He was holding her hand like he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. I thought I was the only secret, she said over coffee. You weren't, I whispered. She nodded. I figured. I told her about Ruth, about Marshall, about Isaiah, about Elise. She listened, took it all in, then opened her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "He gave me this when I was 15, she said. Told me to read it when I felt like I was ready to understand. Inside was a letter, the same handwriting, the same sadness. He wrote, I never learned how to be one whole person. I stitched lives together like quilts but forgot that quilts still unravel if you don't sew them strong. Maya stared out the window after we read it together. I hated him for a while, she said. For disappearing. For pretending I didn't exist. But I also loved him. Because when he did show up, he was kind, quiet, thoughtful. Like he knew his time was limited. We hugged before we left. The kind of hug that lingers, not because of love, but because of recognition. She wasn't my daughter, but she was my husband's. And that was enough to make her part of this growing constellation of grief and truth. Back home, I gathered Elise, Isaiah, and Ruth again. I told them about Maya. Elise didn't look surprised. Did you know? I asked. I suspected, she said. The way he used to leave suddenly. The random disappearances. We decided to invite Maya to Thanksgiving. It felt absurd at first. To make space for a family that didn't know they were family. But when she arrived, with a sweet potato pie and a quiet smile, she fit right in. Isaiah adored her instantly. Elise watched her with curiosity, like looking at a version of herself grown up differently. Ruth greeted her like a woman who had known this day would come. Later that night, as we washed dishes together, Maya turned to me. Do you ever wish you'd never found out? She asked. I paused, drying a plate. No, I said. I wish he had told me himself. I wish I didn't have to piece it all together like a puzzle dumped in the snow. But I don't regret knowing. Because now we can choose what to do with the truth. She nodded. You're strong, she said. I didn't used to be. You are now. And for the first time in decades, I believed that was true. I was strong. Not because I had endured his lies, but because I had faced them, named them, and brought the people they affected into the same room. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one person left who needed to hear it all. One person I had protected from the full truth. The person I had loved the longest. My sister. My sister's name is Joni. She's the kind of woman who wears plaid year-round, keeps peanut brittle in her purse, and can sharpen a knife better than any man I've ever met. She lives up in Talkeetna, in a cabin smaller than a studio apartment, with a wood stove and 3 hound dogs that howl at the mailman like he's the devil himself. We've always been close, but Clay was a subject we rarely touched. When I first brought him home nearly 50 years ago, she raised her eyebrow and said, something about that man's too quiet to trust. I told her she was being dramatic. And then I married him. She never said, I told you so. But now, I wish she had. I drove up to her place the day after Thanksgiving. The roads were slick with black ice, but my hands didn't tremble on the wheel. I had made peace with so much in the last few weeks. Peace with Ruth, with Elise, with Isaiah and Maya. But Joni, she was different. She was the mirror I couldn't lie to. When I arrived, she opened the door before I knocked. Thought you might be coming, she said, stepping aside. I figured it was time, I replied. The cabin smelled like smoked venison and wood ash. I took my coat off, hung it on the nail by the door, and sat in the old chair by the stove. She poured us both black coffee, sat across from me, and waited. I didn't delay. I told her everything. About the photo at the funeral. About Ruth. About the girl on the porch. About Marshall and Isaiah. About Maya. I laid it out plain, like you dress a wound before you clean it. No flinching. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She just listened. When I finished, she took a sip of her coffee, then stared at the fire. I always knew there was something more, she said. You did. Men don't come and go the way he did without keeping secrets. You just didn't want to see it. And I didn't want to be the sister who made you miserable. I looked down at my hands. I feel like a fool, Joni. She scoffed. You're not a fool. You were a woman in love. That's not foolish. It's human. But I'll tell you what would be foolish. I looked up. Letting his secrets keep you from living the life that's finally yours. Her voice was low, steady, not unkind. You've spent your life being loyal to a ghost, Florence. And now that ghost is gone. So what are you gonna do with your time? I didn't have an answer then. Not out loud. But later that night, after Joni went to bed and the fire died low, I found myself staring out her kitchen window. The sky was thick with stars. The kind of sky that makes you feel both small and sacred. And in that moment, the answer came. I wasn't going to hide anymore. Not from the truth. Not from love. Not from life. Not from what came next. Because what came next was mine. Spring came late that year. The snow didn't melt so much as it retreated slowly, like an apology. The ice cracked off the porch roof in slabs, the wind turned softer, and the sky above Kodiak took on that sharp, brilliant blue that only comes after surviving a long, hard winter. I stood in front of the courthouse in my best coat. Inside my purse was a folded name change form, already signed and notarized. Florence Morrow. That's the name I'd carried for nearly 5 decades. That's the name he gave me. But that morning, I handed the clerk my paperwork and whispered the name I'd carried before I ever knew him. Florence Callahan. My father's name. My mother's name. My own name. Not out of spite. Not to erase Clay. But to return to the woman I had been before all the secrets were sewn into my skin. When I stepped outside again, Ruth was waiting on the bench with a coffee in each hand. You did it? She asked. I nodded. She passed me a cup. Good. It's time. We sat there in silence for a moment, watching the people pass. I asked her how the kids were. She told me Isaiah had written a poem for school about the ocean and family, and something called Love You Can't Explain. I smiled. Elise called me that night. The boys were making a snow fort, and she needed tips on how to make the roof hold. Later, she asked if I wanted to come with them this summer to the lower 48. A family trip. She said I'd earned one. I said yes. Then Maya sent me a letter. She'd started writing down her memories of Clay. Good ones. Bad ones. Everything in between. She asked if I wanted to write the foreword. I did. It began. He was a complicated man. But we are not defined by who betrayed us. We are revealed by how we choose to heal. A week later, I planted lilacs outside my cabin. They were Clay's favorite. But they were mine first. And that mattered. The last time I saw Isaiah, he gave me a rock he found near the river. It had a little crack in the middle, shaped like a heart. He said it reminded him of our family. It's not perfect, he said. But it's real. I keep it on my windowsill now, next to the old shoebox of letters. I've read every single one of them, even the ones that made my hands shake. And now I'm writing my own. To the future. To my granddaughter. To anyone who's ever looked in the mirror and wondered if the life they lived was truly theirs. My story began with a lie, but it ended with truth. And the truth, I've learned, will not always set you free. Sometimes, it sets you right.